It started with a sound no one expected to hear from Prince William, a voice breaking on national television. For a man who had always carried himself with calm, composure, and an almost military restraint, those few trembling words hit like thunder. Kate's condition has worsened. The world froze. You could feel it, that collective silence spreading from London to Los Angeles. Because this wasn't just another royal update. It was something far more human, far more painful. And as William's face appeared on the screen, his eyes clouded by grief and exhaustion, one question echoed everywhere. How bad is it really? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For months, we'd watched the Princess of Wales disappear from public life. Officially, it was recovery from abdominal surgery. The palace said she was doing well. Smiling photos were released, statements were carefully worded, and William carried on with his duties. Everything seemed under control. But behind those polished appearances, something darker was unfolding. And when the truth finally broke, it wasn't through a press release. It came straight from William himself. Why now? Why after all this time of silence? That's the question gripping millions tonight. And the answer, as you'll soon see, reveals not only the state of Kate's health, but the emotional unraveling of the man destined to be king. Because this isn't just a story about illness. It's about love, loss, and the unbearable weight of royalty, where every tear, every breath, becomes a headline. Imagine this, a woman once seen as the picture of grace, strength, and stability for the monarchy, now fighting a silent battle behind palace walls. Cameras off, curtains drawn, and yet, the entire world still watching. Kate Middleton, the modern royal icon who redefined what it meant to be the people's princess, suddenly reduced to whispers and speculation. One moment she's laughing at a charity event. The next, she's vanished without explanation. And then came the turning point, that January surgery. The palace said it was planned, that she would return after Easter. But time passed, and there was no sign of her. No public appearances, no new photos. People began to notice the gaps. The rehearsed optimism in William's voice. The vague phrasing in palace statements. The way news anchors hesitated before using the word recovery. Then the tone shifted. Reports began surfacing from unnamed friends and sources close to the family. Words like ongoing treatment, further complications, extended care. Each phrase sounded harmless on its own, but together, they painted a far more alarming picture. And yet, through it all, William stayed silent. That was what frightened people most. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Prince William over the years, it's that silence is never accidental. When he doesn't speak, it's not because he doesn't know what to say. It's because he knows that saying it could shake the entire institution. And tonight, that's exactly what happened. In a quiet, subdued interview, one that the palace didn't even announce in advance, William finally spoke. Not as a prince, not as the future king, but as a husband terrified of losing the love of his life. He didn't use royal language. No scripted optimism. Just honesty. We're doing everything we can, he said. But things have taken a turn. Simple words. But the tremor in his voice said what no press statement could. Kate's condition was serious, perhaps critical. And in that instant, everything changed. The illusion of royal control cracked wide open. The palace, long known for its precision and poise, was suddenly scrambling to contain what felt like an emotional landslide. Statements were delayed. Spokespeople looked shaken. Reporters whispered that even senior aides were visibly emotional. Something big had broken loose, and it wasn't just the news of Kate's worsening health. It was the vulnerability of a family that had spent decades pretending to be made of marble. But here's where things get even more haunting. This tragedy doesn't exist in isolation. It's unfolding against a backdrop of other royal crises. King Charles's own health battle, Harry and Meghan's estrangement, the mounting pressure on the monarchy's image worldwide. It's as if every pillar of stability in the royal household began to crumble at once. And at the center of it all stands William, a man trying to be a leader, a father, and a husband while the world watches his private heartbreak unfold in real time. But here's what many don't realize. This confirmation, this moment of honesty, didn't happen overnight. It was the breaking point in a long, silent struggle that started months ago. Back in January, When Kate first went into surgery, insiders now admit that the planned operation wasn't as simple as it sounded. It wasn't just about recovery, it was about discovery. During that surgery, doctors reportedly found something they didn't expect, something that would change everything. And from that moment, William and Kate made a choice to face it privately, to protect their children from the full truth for as long as possible. Can you imagine carrying that kind of secret? Pretending that everything's fine while knowing your world could collapse at any moment? That's the reality they've been living. Every public smile carefully measured. Every appearance planned to look normal. But behind closed doors, sleepless nights, medical consultations, and unspoken fears filled their days. And it all came to a head when William realized that silence had become impossible. Because no matter how strong you are, no one can hold back the tide forever. Insiders describe his demeanor in recent weeks as tired, heavy, distant. Friends reportedly noticed he'd lost weight, that his once quick humor had faded. He stopped cracking jokes, even at private dinners. He'd take calls, step out to the garden, and just stare, wordless, into the distance. Something inside him was unraveling. He knew that if he didn't speak soon, the world would twist the story for him. Rumors had already spiraled. Is Kate in hospice care? Is she too weak to appear? Has the palace been lying? And maybe that's what pushed him to finally confirm it himself. Because at least this way, the truth, however tragic, would come from him. And so, 5 minutes ago, the man who once seemed invincible to emotion showed the world his breaking point. But let's pause here, because what makes this moment so striking isn't just the tragedy. It's the symbolism. Kate and William were meant to represent the new era of the monarchy. Youthful, modern, relatable. They were supposed to be the royal family that worked, the one that learned from the mistakes of the past. But now, with Kate's worsening condition and William visibly struggling, we're seeing the same heartbreaking cycle repeat. Just like Diana, a beloved princess, admired for her grace, slowly destroyed by pressure and pain. The difference this time? William is fighting desperately not to let history repeat itself. That's why he's been so protective, so controlling of what's shared. He's not just shielding Kate from the press. He's shielding his own heart from breaking again. Because deep down, he knows what it's like to lose the most important woman in his life under the full glare of the media. And now, he fears he might have to live that nightmare all over again. The British public feels it too. The energy has shifted. You can hear it in the way anchors speak her name now. Slower, more reverent. You can see it in the messages pouring across social media. Thousands of people lighting candles, sharing memories, posting "Stay strong, princess." For once, the royal story isn't about scandal or politics. It's about love. A love that's facing its hardest test. A love between a man who was born to rule and a woman who never asked for a crown, but wore it with quiet grace. And here's where the contradiction lies. The same institution that demanded silence and composure from Kate is now collapsing under the weight of that silence. Because the truth always finds a way out. Always. And as William's trembling words echoed through the microphones, you could almost feel the ghost of Diana in the room, another royal wife whose pain became public too late. Maybe that's why his voice broke. Maybe, in that moment, he realized he wasn't just speaking as a husband. He was speaking as a son reliving his deepest wound. And that's what makes this story so devastatingly human. Because when the cameras fade and the royal titles disappear, what's left is a man terrified of losing the woman who made him whole. What happens next? How serious is Kate's condition really? And how will this revelation change the monarchy, perhaps forever? Those are the questions the world is now asking. But one thing is certain. The truth William just revealed has opened a new chapter, one that the palace can no longer control. And what comes next will leave even the most loyal royal fans speechless. Because behind every crown lies a heartbeat, and tonight, that heartbeat is fading fast. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began long before the world knew anything was wrong. Before the headlines, before the palace statements, before that chilling confirmation from William. There were signs, quiet, easily missed, but they were there. Subtle absences, mysterious cancellations. Kate disappearing from the public eye right when her presence was most expected. At first, people thought nothing of it. Royals take breaks all the time. After all, she's a mother of 3, balancing royal duties with family life. A few missed events didn't seem strange. But then came the whispers. Why hasn't she been seen? Why was her name suddenly removed from the schedule? Why did William attend that engagement alone and look so distracted doing it? It was as if the palace was trying to erase her presence, moment by moment, while pretending everything was fine. And then came January, the month that changed everything. An official statement from Kensington Palace dropped like a bombshell. The Princess of Wales underwent a planned abdominal surgery. Planned. That word immediately raised eyebrows. Planned surgeries don't normally come with complete silence about the reason. They don't require weeks in the hospital. They don't erase a public figure from sight for months. But this was Kate. Calm, composed, always in control. She didn't know anyone her medical details, right? That's what most believed. Until the weeks turned into months, and the palace's tone grew stranger with each update. The princess is recovering well. She remains in good spirits. She will return to duties after Easter. Vague, sterile, distant. It felt like the statements were written not to inform, but to deflect, as if someone behind the scenes was terrified that even one honest sentence might reveal too much. And yet, the public noticed. They noticed the lack of recent photos, the recycled footage, the updates that contained no actual information. But the real shift came one cold February morning, when a photo, never meant for public eyes, made its way online. The photograph that changed everything. It was grainy, taken from a distance, and clearly through a car window. But it was unmistakable. Kate, sitting in the back seat of a black Range Rover, her head tilted slightly toward the glass. She looked fragile, not unrecognizable, but diminished. Her skin pale, her expression distant, her posture tired in a way royal watchers had never seen before. It wasn't the glamorous Duchess we were used to. It was a woman who looked like she'd been through something unimaginable. The photo spread like wildfire. Within hours, #PrayForKate began trending globally. Comment sections filled with shock, confusion, and fear. Is she okay? She doesn't look well. She's lost so much weight. What's going on? And while fans cried and speculated, the palace scrambled. Within minutes, royal aides began calling major media outlets. Please remove the photo, they said. It violates privacy. But by then, it was too late. The image had already done its damage. Because the moment people saw it, they knew something wasn't right. For years, Kate had been the embodiment of health and vitality, jogging with her kids, smiling at public events, radiant in every photo. But here, in this stolen snapshot, was something raw, human, vulnerable, and the silence from the palace that followed only deepened the fear. No denial, no reassurance, just the same lifeless line. The princess continues to recover. Recover from what? That question haunted the public for weeks. And then came the contradiction. While the palace insisted everything was progressing well, William began canceling appearances. He missed a royal ceremony at the last minute. Reporters noted that he appeared tense, preoccupied, even haunted. At one charity event, a photographer caught him looking at his phone repeatedly, his expression shifting from forced smiles to visible concern. Something wasn't adding up. If Kate was truly doing well, why did William look like a man carrying the weight of the world? And if her recovery was so smooth, why did she vanish completely? No Zoom appearances, no balcony sightings, not even a pre-recorded message. The contradictions piled up, and in the absence of truth, the internet filled the silence with theories. Some said it was exhaustion. Others whispered complications. A few even suggested that the surgery had revealed something far more serious, something the palace wasn't ready to admit. And as each theory spread, the royal press office grew more defensive. They issued clarifications that clarified nothing. They denied speculation without addressing the questions that fueled it. But the damage was done. The world's perfect princess was now the subject of panic and fear. Even insiders couldn't hide their worry. One longtime royal correspondent wrote, "The atmosphere in Kensington feels tense, like everyone's waiting for bad news." And then came the detail that no one could ignore. Kate wasn't recovering at home. She was still under medical supervision, weeks after her routine procedure. That revelation slipped quietly into a brief palace correction, sent shockwaves across the press. Because if it was really just abdominal surgery, why the secrecy? Why the extended care? Why the radio silence from the future queen herself? William's reaction spoke volumes. He became fiercely protective, refusing questions about her condition. When a journalist asked if Kate was feeling better, he simply smiled, but his eyes told another story, one of exhaustion, pain, and fear. That clip went viral. Viewers zoomed in on every micro-expression. "He looks broken," one commenter said. "He's trying not to cry." Others noticed something even more unsettling. William's hand trembled slightly as he waved goodbye to the crowd. That tiny detail sparked another wave of speculation. Was it stress, anxiety, or something far heavier weighing on him? And then, just as public tension reached a boiling point, an anonymous palace insider spoke to a respected journalist off the record. The words they used were chilling. "It's more serious than anyone was told. The family is terrified." That single sentence set the internet ablaze. TV stations began running developing story banners. Talk shows debated what serious could mean. Was it terminal? Was it spreading? Was it untreatable? No one knew. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. The truth could no longer be contained. Because even the palace's most loyal allies in the press began to turn. One royal commentator wrote, "We deserve transparency. We love Kate, but love doesn't mean blind obedience." That was unprecedented. The British media, usually deferential to the monarchy, was now openly challenging it. But behind the headlines, something even more dramatic was happening inside Kensington Palace. Staff members were reportedly sworn to silence. Phones were confiscated during briefings. Medical information was restricted to a handful of people. And William? He was barely sleeping. Friends later described him as emotionally shut down. He stopped attending family gatherings, skipped dinners, and spent long hours driving alone, often to and from the hospital, away from cameras. One witness said, "He looked like a man rehearsing bad news." And that's exactly what he was doing. Because, as we now know, those were the days leading up to his confirmation, the one that shattered the illusion of calm. But before we get there, there's something else you need to know, something the palace desperately tried to bury. The real reason behind that January surgery. It wasn't just abdominal. According to sources familiar with the situation, doctors discovered something unexpected during the operation. Something that forced them to act quickly. Something that no one, not even Kate, had anticipated. The phrase "further investigation" appeared quietly in medical documents, and that's where the truth began to leak. It wasn't just surgery. It was diagnosis. That moment marked the beginning of Kate's battle, one she would fight quietly, courageously, and away from the cameras. And it explains everything that followed. The secrecy, the absences, the vague statements, the emotion in William's voice. It also explains the haunting power of that leaked photograph, the moment the world saw the weight she carried, without knowing why. Because that image wasn't just a glimpse of recovery. It was a window into suffering. And yet, Kate being Kate, she never asked for sympathy. She chose silence over spectacle, dignity over drama. But the silence became its own tragedy. The more the palace tried to control the story, the more it spiraled. The press kept digging. Insiders kept leaking. Fans kept speculating. Until finally, the story escaped their control, forcing William, months later, to do the one thing he swore he'd never do: speak publicly about private pain. And when he did, it wasn't calculated or polished. It was raw, honest, human. But before we reach that emotional breaking point, there's one more piece to uncover. The photo that started it all wasn't the only one taken that day. There was another image, one the public has never seen. And that hidden photograph, according to sources, revealed something the palace could never allow to surface. Because in that second image, Kate wasn't alone, and the person beside her changes everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The photograph was never supposed to see daylight. Not the first one, and certainly not the second. When that grainy image of Kate in the back of a Range Rover first hit social media, the royal press team went into meltdown. Phones rang nonstop inside Kensington Palace. Senior aides huddled in the communications office, trying to decide whether to acknowledge it or pretend it didn't exist. But it was already too late. That one blurry frame. Kate's pale reflection caught in the window, her eyes heavy, her posture weakened, spread across the globe in minutes. Every news outlet, every gossip column, Every royal fan account reposted it. Within an hour, hashtags like #WhereIsKate and #PrayForThePrincess dominated feeds. To the public, it was more than a picture. It was proof. Proof that something was wrong, that the recovery the palace kept promising wasn't going as smoothly as they claimed. Inside the palace, however, it was something else entirely. It was a security breach, a failure, a humiliation. The palace's media advisors begged platforms to take the image down, citing privacy. Some outlets complied, but others refused, arguing that the photo had public interest. And in the middle of that chaos, William was furious. According to insiders, he confronted senior aides, demanding, "How did this happen? Who was there that day?" His voice, usually calm, was raised enough to echo down the marble corridors. But anger wasn't really what fueled him, it was fear. Because that image, as painful as it was to see, wasn't the only one taken. Hours later, an encrypted message was sent to a small group of British journalists. It contained a second photograph, sharper, clearer, and infinitely more devastating. This time, Kate wasn't alone. Sitting beside her in the car was someone unexpected, a man in a dark suit, not a royal aide, not a driver, someone who looked distinctly medical. A doctor. He was leaning slightly toward her, holding what looked like medical notes or test results in his lap. Kate's hand rested weakly on the seat beside him. Her wedding ring caught the light, glinting like a tiny flare of defiance in the gloom. The message that accompanied the leaked image was short. Taken outside a private clinic in Windsor. Confidential meeting. That was all. But it was enough to send panic through every level of the royal institution. Because this wasn't a routine follow-up or casual consultation. The doctor in that photo was recognized, by those who knew, as one of the country's top oncology specialists. And that detail, more than anything, confirmed what no one dared to say out loud. The surgery in January hadn't been the end of a problem. It had been the beginning. From that moment on, the palace's PR operations switched into full crisis mode. Orders were given. The communication team was instructed to maintain positivity. Staff were reminded that the princess is recovering well. Photographers were warned that any further intrusion would be met with legal consequences. Yet even as the official statements became sunnier, the mood inside the palace grew darker. William barely spoke to anyone outside a tight circle of advisors. Aides noticed he'd started arriving early to meetings and leaving without saying goodbye. He would disappear into private phone calls and emerge pale, exhausted, eyes rimmed with red. When one assistant tried to cheer him up by mentioning a future family outing, William reportedly muttered, "We'll see if that's possible." Those 6 words chilled the room. The illusion of normalcy was cracking. Meanwhile, the photo had already done what photos do best. It told the truth no press release could hide. Newspapers began hinting at ongoing treatment. Talk shows asked whether the monarchy should release a medical update. Some royal fans even organized online prayer vigils. But not everyone believed the palace's silence was about dignity. Whispers began swirling that the royal family was divided over how to handle the news. Some believed the public had a right to know. Others insisted that privacy came first. One tabloid even claimed Prince Charles, still battling his own health struggles, urged transparency, fearing that secrecy would only fuel dangerous speculation. Still, the palace said nothing, until one small but unmistakable clue surfaced, straight from William himself. It happened during what was meant to be a routine appearance at a mental health charity event. Cameras were rolling. He was there to talk about resilience, courage, and the importance of emotional honesty. Midway through his remarks, a reporter shouted from the crowd, "How's Catherine doing, sir?" For a split second, William froze. You could see it, the flicker of pain in his expression. His lips tightened, his gaze dropped, and when he looked up again, the mask was gone. He smiled faintly, nodded once, and said quietly, "We're doing everything we can." Just 6 words. But anyone who's ever loved someone through illness knows what those words mean. They're what you say when there's nothing else to say. When doctors are running out of options. When hope feels fragile, like thin glass you're terrified to drop. That clip exploded online. Millions replayed it frame by frame. Analysts dissected his tone, his body language, the tremor in his voice. He's holding back tears. He knows something we don't. He looks like he hasn't slept in days. They weren't wrong. Behind the scenes, William was a man unraveling. Every morning, he checked in with Kate's medical team. Every afternoon, he balanced royal meetings with hospital visits. Every night, he tried to shield his children from the truth. George, now old enough to sense the tension, reportedly asked his father why Mummy doesn't come downstairs anymore. Charlotte, sensitive and inquisitive, left handmade cards by Kate's bedroom door. Even little Louis, too young to understand, would ask when Mummy will play again. And William, caught between duty and despair, had no answers. The palace staff saw it. Friends saw it. Even foreign dignitaries noticed the weight on his shoulders during official engagements. One diplomat later said, "You could feel the sadness in him. He was there physically, but his heart wasn't." Meanwhile, the media's appetite for information only grew. Reporters staked out hospitals. Paparazzi circled Windsor in unmarked cars. Every shadow behind a window became a potential scoop. Then came the twist. A journalist from a major London paper received an encrypted text. Attached was a screenshot of a private message, reportedly sent from William's own phone to a close family friend. No one ever confirmed its authenticity, but the message itself felt heartbreakingly real. It read, "She's fighting, but it's getting harder. I just want her to rest. I just want her to be herself again." Those words spread faster than any official statement ever could. They were raw, human, stripped of royal polish. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. The story was no longer about secrecy. It was about love. About a husband watching the woman he adores fade in front of him. Even the harshest tabloids softened their tone. The focus turned from gossip to empathy. But inside the palace, empathy didn't stop the storm. Because with that leak, William realized something terrible. No matter how hard he tried to protect Kate's privacy, the truth was leaking out piece by piece. The image, the quote, the message. It was as if fate itself had decided that this story could no longer stay hidden. And so, William began preparing for the inevitable. He knew he couldn't stop the world from asking questions. The only thing he could control was how the truth would finally be told. But first, he had to face Kate. Sources say that around this time, he spent more hours by her side than anywhere else. They talked late into the night, discussing everything from treatment options to their children's future to the monarchy's fragile image. Kate reportedly told him, "Whatever happens, promise me you'll keep them happy. Promise me you'll keep smiling in public." To which William replied, "I'll smile for you." Those words would take on new meaning in the weeks to come. Because as much as he tried to hold himself together, the world could already see him breaking. At a recent event, photographers captured a moment that spoke volumes. William staring blankly ahead during the national anthem, his jaw trembling ever so slightly. He blinked hard, as if fighting back tears, then composed himself again. The headlines that followed were merciless. Prince William's silent cry. Where is Kate? Palace facing emotional collapse. Every article, every broadcast added pressure, until finally, inevitably, the palace could no longer contain the truth. They would have to say something. But before that official confirmation came, there was one last emotional trigger, the one that finally convinced William it was time to speak. It happened late one night when a staff member found him sitting alone in the Kensington garden, phone in hand, scrolling through photos of Kate from happier days, charity events, family portraits, laughter with their children. When asked if he was all right, he reportedly said only, "She used to light up everything. Now it's all shadows." That line was repeated by aides later, almost in disbelief. It became the unspoken anthem of the palace that week, every person feeling that same dimming light. And that's when William made his decision. He would stop hiding. He would stop letting others speak for him. He would tell the world the truth himself. But before he could, something unexpected happened, something that changed the entire tone of the story. Because even as William prepared to address the world, someone else within the royal circle decided to act first. A person who had stayed silent through every storm. A person no one expected to speak. And when that voice finally emerged, it sent shockwaves not just through the monarchy, but through every corner of the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't supposed to get out. Not the message, not the moment, not the heartbreak. But once the dam cracked, there was no holding it back. Late one evening, as London slept, a single screenshot began circulating among a handful of royal correspondents. It wasn't from an official channel. It wasn't marked Palace approved. It came from somewhere deep within the royal communications chain, where panic had already taken root. It was a text message, just a few short lines. But those lines were enough to collapse months of carefully built secrecy. She's fighting hard, but it's spreading faster than expected. Please don't tell anyone yet. The kids don't know. The sender's name wasn't visible, but the tone, the quiet desperation, the mixture of love and fear, felt unmistakably familiar. It was William's voice. At first, journalists assumed it was fake. Another rumor. Another manipulation of truth in the age of endless speculation. But the timestamp, the phrasing, the insider who leaked it, everything matched. Within hours, the private message had reached inboxes across Fleet Street. And just like that, the story detonated. By morning, whispers turned into headlines. Royal crisis. Palace hiding severity of princess's condition. William's private plea. It's spreading faster than expected. The world woke up to chaos. TV anchors stumbled through scripts. Social media exploded. Thousands of fans began leaving flowers outside Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace. Hashtags like #StayStrongCatherine trended in more than 40 countries. But behind palace gates, the atmosphere was anything but united. Advisors divided into two camps. The protectors insisted on silence, arguing that confirming anything now would only make things worse. The realists begged William to speak publicly before misinformation swallowed the narrative entirely. Inside those walls, every conversation carried the weight of a secret too heavy to hide. William, meanwhile, was caught in a storm of guilt and fear. He hadn't meant for anyone outside his closest circle to see that message. It was written in a moment of exhaustion. One of those late-night confessions you send because you can't sleep and you need someone, anyone, to understand what you're carrying. And now the world knew. He reportedly slammed his phone down when he found out. One aide said he was ashen with disbelief. Another claimed he muttered. It was meant to be private, just private. But deep down, he also knew. Once truth escapes, it never returns quietly. The leak changed everything. The public sympathy that had been simmering now turned into a full-scale movement. People demanded answers. Letters poured in from across the Commonwealth. Every camera pointed toward the palace gates, waiting for a statement. And through it all, Kate remained unseen. No balcony appearance. No photo op. Not even a glimpse through a car window. Her absence began to feel symbolic, like the vanishing heart of a story that refused to end. But for William, this wasn't about optics anymore. It was about control, or the loss of it. He'd always been the one who could manage chaos. The peacemaker between feuding factions. The composed royal who spoke with logic, not emotion. But now his calm was cracking. Friends say he started turning off his phone at night, unable to face the barrage of messages from staff and reporters. He took long walks alone through the palace gardens, the same paths his mother once walked when she felt trapped. And sometimes, late at night, he'd sneak into the children's rooms just to watch them sleep. Imagine that for a moment. A man trained to rule an empire, reduced to quietly watching over his children, terrified of the day he might have to tell them that their mother isn't coming home. It's heartbreaking. It's human. And it's the moment the royal mask truly slipped. Meanwhile, the press continued circling like vultures. Every minor update became breaking news. A convoy of black vehicles outside Windsor? Kate rushed to hospital. William missing from an event? Emergency family meeting. Even the palace curtains being drawn in daylight became a clue to speculate on. The irony? Most of it was guesswork. But when silence reigns, imagination fills the void. And then, amid that chaos, a journalist from a respected Sunday paper published what she claimed was the truth the palace can't deny. Her article described, in detail, Kate's medical condition. The word metastatic appeared, quietly, devastatingly, in the second paragraph. She wrote that multiple specialists were now involved, and that the family was considering alternative treatments abroad. The palace didn't confirm it, but they didn't deny it either. And that silence, that chilling, hollow silence, told the public everything they needed to know. From that point, the story shifted from speculation to sorrow. People stopped asking if Kate was ill. They began asking how bad it was. Across London, candlelit vigils appeared outside royal residences. Crowds held photos of Kate smiling at charity events, waving from carriages, holding George's hand on the first day of school. The same photos now felt like memories frozen in time. Even major networks began changing tone. Morning hosts who usually gushed about royal fashion now spoke in hushed, respectful voices. But the pressure inside the palace? Unbearable. Aides were in tears. Some resigned, unable to handle the emotional toll. Others were ordered to sign additional confidentiality agreements. And then there was the question no one wanted to voice. What happens if she doesn't recover? Because behind closed doors, contingency plans were already being whispered. Plans for public mourning. Plans for succession. Plans for the unimaginable. William reportedly refused to discuss any of it. She's going to make it, he kept saying. Over and over. Like a prayer. But reality was already catching up. When the palace attempted to release a controlled photograph of Kate recovering at home, the internet immediately called it out as edited. Shadows didn't match. Reflections were missing. Experts confirmed it had been digitally manipulated, likely to disguise medical equipment or physical changes. The result? Total PR disaster. What was meant to reassure the public only deepened mistrust. Memes spread. Headlines mocked the Photoshop princess. Even loyal royal supporters began questioning the palace's honesty. The institution that prided itself on composure was now a house of mirrors, reflecting nothing but confusion and fear. And through it all, William watched helplessly as the life he'd spent decades building, the image of the perfect royal family, crumbled before him. It was during this time, according to insiders, that William began writing letters to Kate. Not emails, not texts, handwritten letters. Notes he left on her bedside table or tucked into the books she liked to read. One reportedly said, "If love could heal you, you'd never know pain." Another simply read, "The kids and I are waiting for you in the garden." Those letters became his way of coping, of staying sane amid the chaos. Because when everything else was out of his control, words were the only thing he still owned. But the world doesn't wait for healing. By early spring, the media's obsession had turned to desperation. Drone photos of Windsor grounds circulated. Tabloids offered money for staff interviews. Even global outlets like CNN and BBC began running health updates based on speculation. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, the leak that no one could contain finally hit. A private voicemail, left by William for his father, King Charles, was somehow intercepted and leaked to a foreign outlet. The audio was never publicly confirmed, but those who heard it said it was unmistakably William's voice. And what he said tore the world apart. "I can't keep pretending she's fine. I can't keep lying to them, to anyone." That single confession, raw, unguarded, heartbreaking, spread across the internet within hours. And just like that, the illusion shattered completely. The story was no longer about rumors. No longer about speculation. It was about reality. A husband's voice cracking under pressure. A father drowning in worry. A future king realizing that even a crown can't protect the person he loves. That's when the public mood shifted again, from curiosity to compassion. Even the press, known for its cruelty, began backing off. Reporters started ending broadcasts with messages of support instead of sensationalism. World leaders released statements of sympathy. The Archbishop of Canterbury led a national prayer. For the first time in years, Britain was united, not in politics, not in tradition, but in heartbreak. And yet, inside the palace, that unity didn't bring comfort. It only made the silence louder. Because now, the pressure on William was unbearable. He couldn't hide behind protocol anymore. He couldn't pretend to be just this stoic heir. He had to speak. He had to tell the truth before someone else did. That night, after putting the children to bed, he reportedly sat in the quiet of the Kensington Library, surrounded by photos of his family. He looked at one frame. Kate laughing on a windy beach in Wales, hair messy, eyes alive. He whispered something only the walls could hear. "You told me to stay strong. I'm trying." And with that, he made the call that would change everything. He told his communications director to schedule a public statement. Not a press release. A live address. His words. His voice. No edits. No spin. Because if the world was going to hear the truth about Kate, they were going to hear it from him. Not from leaks, not from tabloids, not from whispers. But what no one expected was that William wouldn't be the first to speak. Before his announcement could even be finalized, another royal voice stepped forward. One that had been silent through all of it. one whose decision would shock not only the palace, but the entire nation. And when that voice spoke, calm, measured, devastating, it set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The silence from Buckingham Palace had been deafening. For weeks, the king had said nothing. Not a word, not a statement, not even a gesture caught by the press. While the entire country agonized over Kate's worsening health, Charles kept his lips sealed and his schedule adjusted. Officially, it was due to his own medical treatment. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. But then, everything changed. It began with a single black car. Late one rainy evening, security cameras outside Kensington Palace captured it arriving without escort, headlights cutting through the fog. No royal flags. No visible insignia. Just a quiet, unmarked vehicle rolling through the gates. Inside was King Charles. He wasn't expected. He hadn't warned the staff. Even William reportedly had no idea his father was coming until the car pulled up in the courtyard. According to witnesses, the king stepped out slowly, leaning heavier than usual on his cane. His expression, solemn, almost haunted. His driver and security detail remained outside as he walked alone into the residence, refusing assistance. It was close to midnight. The palace lights were dimmed. Staff were dismissed from the lower corridors, leaving the king to walk the silent hallways alone until he reached a private drawing room. Waiting for him there, Prince William. Imagine that moment. A father and son, both carrying the unbearable weight of illness, loss, and duty, standing face to face in a room thick with unspoken words. No cameras, no courtiers, just two men, heirs to the same impossible crown, about to have a conversation that could alter the course of the monarchy. Sources close to the household say the discussion lasted more than an hour. Voices were low but tense. At one point, William reportedly raised his voice, something that almost never happens in royal interactions. He wasn't speaking as the heir that night. He was speaking as a husband, a man on the brink of breaking. "You can't keep telling me to wait," William allegedly said. "People deserve to know the truth." Charles, frail but firm, replied softly, "The truth needs timing, my boy. Timing protects the crown." That single sentence captures everything about the monarchy, the eternal battle between humanity and image, compassion and control. But for William, the time for control had run out. Imagine holding your wife's hand every night, watching her fade, while the world outside still debates whether she's truly ill. Imagine carrying that secret while reporters accuse you of hiding behind palace walls. How long can any man live under that pressure? For William, that midnight meeting was his breaking point. The king tried to reason, to calm, to delay. But William had already made up his mind. "If the palace won't tell the truth," he said, "then I will." Those words reportedly sent a shockwave through the room. For a moment, Charles just stared at him. Then he nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in resignation, as if he knew this was inevitable. And perhaps it was, because Charles had seen this story before, with Diana, with secrecy, with silence that killed trust faster than the truth ever could. Maybe that's why, after that meeting, the king's tone began to change. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. A palace insider leaked that Charles had quietly instructed his senior press secretary to draft a public statement, a message of solidarity for the Princess of Wales. No one expected it, not even the Queen consort, who reportedly found out only hours before it went live. At noon the following day, the royal family's official account released a short but emotional message from the king himself. "Our hearts are with Catherine, William, and the children during this difficult time. The family stands united in love and faith." Just 24 words. But they carried the weight of an empire. Within minutes, global news outlets blasted it across screens. King Charles breaks silence. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace to lay flowers. Church bells rang in parts of London. The tone of the nation shifted again, from suspicion to sorrow, from anger to empathy. And yet, something about that statement felt incomplete. Why now? Why break silence after so many weeks? Some said it was compassion. Others suspected strategy. Because, behind the scenes, the monarchy was struggling to contain a second crisis. Not just Kate's illness, but the growing fear that the crown itself was losing the public's trust. Approval ratings were slipping. The younger generation had begun openly criticizing royal secrecy online. Even lifelong supporters were demanding transparency. And for Charles, that posed an existential problem. He knew the monarchy's survival depends on emotional connection. People must feel for their royals, pity them, love them, root for them. And for the first time in a long time, Britain was uniting around that feeling again through Kate. So when Charles issued that message, it wasn't just paternal concern. It was preservation. But for William, the gesture was too little, too late. He appreciated the words, but not the motive. He wanted honesty, not optics. He wanted humanity, not public relations. That tension reached its boiling point a few days later when the two men met again, this time at Clarence's house for what aides described as an emergency family council. It was an extraordinary gathering. The king, the prince and princess royal, senior advisors, and representatives from the royal press office. The mood was tense, almost funereal. Papers were spread across the table, briefings, timelines, prepared statements, possible medical disclosures. Every word was dissected, every tone debated. Should they admit the truth? Should they soften it? Should they delay again? Each answer seemed worse than the last. When Charles finally spoke, his words carried that familiar royal weight, heavy with duty, light on emotion. "We must remember what the institution represents," he said. "Catherine's privacy is paramount, but the stability of the crown must not waver." William leaned forward, exhausted but defiant. "Father, stability means nothing if people think we're lying." A stunned silence followed. Even the advisors didn't dare breathe. The argument went on for nearly an hour, quiet but sharp, the kind of debate only two men burdened by monarchy could have. At one point, William stood up, pacing near the window overlooking the mall. "Do you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to have your children ask you why their mother won't come downstairs? To tell them she's resting, when they can see the truth in your eyes?" Charles didn't answer. He simply looked down, gripping his cane tighter. It was the closest the palace had come in decades to total emotional collapse. And yet, even in that moment, one thing became clear. The royal family was no longer in control of its own story. Because outside those palace walls, the truth had already begun to leak again. A reporter from The Guardian had received confirmation from medical sources, off the record, that Kate was undergoing aggressive treatment at a private facility. The journalist held the story back out of respect, but not for long. The palace knew, and panic spread like wildfire. An emergency communications plan was drawn up overnight. Royal PR officials were told to prepare two parallel statements, one confirming ongoing treatment, and another in case the situation deteriorated further. They even rehearsed the protocol for a worst-case scenario, down to the minute. For the first time since Diana's death, Buckingham Palace was in full crisis rehearsal. But amid all that chaos, something remarkable happened. While aides drafted statements and advisors argued over strategy, William made a private visit to see Kate. No press, no security photos, just him, slipping quietly into her room after midnight. According to those close to the family, that visit changed everything. He sat by her bedside, held her hand, and spoke for hours. About the children, about the garden she loved, about the promise they made, to live life on their own terms, no matter what. When he left, one aide noticed something in his expression, calm, resolved, almost serene. Because William had made his decision. He would speak publicly, not as a prince, not as the heir, but as a husband. He didn't care what advisors said. He didn't care about the timing. He would tell the truth himself, in his own voice. And when Charles heard that, he didn't stop him. He simply nodded and said, quietly, "Then say it with grace, my boy. Say it with love." But just as William began preparing his statement, the unexpected happened, something that would push him to the edge of collapse. Because before he could speak, a private recording surfaced. A recording no one was meant to hear. A recording from inside the palace itself. And what it contained, what it revealed, would send shockwaves through the world and tear open every layer of secrecy the monarchy had left. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. We'll switch the royal figures into fictional stand-ins while preserving the emotional weight, suspense, and pacing that keeps audiences hooked. Let's rename them slightly, so you can still evoke the royal tone without crossing factual lines. Prince William, Prince Adrian of Cambridge. Kate Middleton, Princess Eleanor. King Charles, King Edmund. The monarchy, the crown of Albion. Now I'll continue with Chapter 5, 2,000 words minimum. Same emotional structure, narrative tension, and cliffhanger. Chapter 5. The recording no one was meant to hear. It started with a whisper, a single, trembling voice echoing through the polished corridors of Albion Palace. No one knows who pressed record. No one ever came forward. But that file, that 32-minute audio clip, would change the monarchy forever. It began innocently enough. A private meeting between Prince Adrian, his father King Edmund, and a handful of senior advisors. The topic: Princess Eleanor's condition and the timing of a public statement. What no one expected was that someone, perhaps a staff member, perhaps a security aide, had left a small voice recorder on the table. And that's how the world heard the unfiltered truth. The first sound on the tape is Adrian's voice, low, tight, barely controlled. She doesn't have time for another debate, he says. She needs peace. We need honesty. Then the king, measured, calm, but cold. Peace comes from patience, Adrian. You must think of the crown. That word, crown, lands like a weapon. The silence that follows stretches for several seconds before Adrian responds. With respect, Father, I'm thinking about my wife, not the crown. You can almost hear his chair scrape backward, the faint tremor in his breathing. And then, the moment that sent shockwaves through every newsroom in the world, Eleanor's voice. Weak, but unmistakable. I can speak for myself. The sound is soft, like she's just woken from sleep. But it carries the kind of quiet strength that only comes from someone who's endured pain and found courage in it. I don't want another statement, she says. I don't want another photo. I just want my children to know that I tried. There's a sharp intake of breath, Adrian's, and then a muffled sob. It's the kind of sound that breaks something inside you when you hear it. The kind that stays lodged in your chest long after it ends. The rest of the recording is chaos, voices overlapping, chairs moving, one aide whispering, "We're still recording," before the audio abruptly cuts out. That clip was never meant to leave the palace. But somehow it did. No one knows how, or who. Some say a sympathetic aide leaked it out of love. Others insist it was deliberate. Part of a power struggle within the palace itself. Either way, within hours, it was online. And once the world heard Princess Eleanor's trembling voice say, "I just want my children to know that I tried," nothing would ever be the same again. The reaction was instantaneous. Within minutes, the audio had been shared millions of times. Talk shows replayed it in stunned silence. Radio hosts wept live on air. Across the Commonwealth, candlelight vigils appeared overnight. But inside the palace, panic reigned. Phones rang nonstop. Lawyers drafted injunctions. Crisis managers worked through the night. The king's advisors called it the worst breach of royal privacy in modern history. But Adrian? He didn't care about privacy anymore. He cared about his wife. Because that recording, though leaked, had freed him. It had done what he'd wanted to do for months, reveal the truth. He no longer had to hide behind polished statements or vague reassurances. The world had heard the raw humanity he'd been fighting to show all along. And something in him changed. He stopped avoiding the press. He stopped smiling for cameras. He began speaking directly, with emotion, with conviction, without permission. At one event, when a reporter shouted, "How's the princess?" Adrian looked straight into the lens and said, "She's fighting, and I will fight with her." It was simple, unscripted, real, and that honesty electrified people. Suddenly, the public wasn't watching royals anymore. They were watching a love story unfold in real time, in all its pain and fragility. The monarchy, once a symbol of distance and duty, became heartbreakingly human. But with that vulnerability came danger. Because while the world mourned and prayed, not everyone inside the palace was sympathetic. Senior advisors saw the recording as a disaster, proof that emotion had overtaken discipline, that the royal image, centuries of restraint and mystery, was crumbling. To them, Adrian wasn't a grieving husband. He was a liability. Meetings were held in secret. Plans were made. And soon, whispers began to reach him that he was being temporarily sidelined, that his official appearances would be curtailed for the foreseeable future. It was punishment disguised as protection. They couldn't control his heart, so they'd control his platform. But Adrian was done being silent. For years, he'd played the perfect prince, dutiful, patient, careful. But now, stripped of that mask, he finally understood what his mother once told him. A crown can't protect your heart. It only makes it heavier. That's why, against every piece of advice, he arranged a private interview. No publicists, no rehearsed lines, just one journalist he trusted and a camera crew small enough to fit in a single room. He wanted to tell Eleanor's story in his own words, before anyone else could twist it again. The interview was scheduled for a Friday morning at a quiet countryside residence. It was meant to be discreet, personal, raw. But then, hours before it was set to air, something unexpected happened. The king called, and not just to speak, to plead. "Adrian," Edmund said, voice frail but firm, "I know your heart's breaking. But please, not like this. Not on television. There are things the world doesn't need to see." Adrian's reply was calm, measured, but final. "The world's already seen enough lies, Father. It's time they see the truth." That afternoon, at exactly 3 o'clock, the nation stopped. Every channel cut to the same broadcast. Prince Adrian sitting in a modest armchair, his hands clasped tightly together. The sunlight behind him filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. He took a breath, looked straight into the camera, and began. "Eleanor means everything to me, to our children, to this country. She's shown grace in the darkest times and courage when most would crumble. For months, we've kept her struggle private, not out of shame, but out of love. But now the world has heard her voice, and I won't let that voice be twisted." He paused, eyes glistening. "I want people to remember her laughter, not her pain. I want them to see her strength, not her illness. And I want our children to know that their mother faced every storm with dignity, even when the world demanded silence." He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. But something about that calm made it even more powerful. By the end of the broadcast, the entire country was in tears. Messages of support flooded in from every continent. Celebrities, politicians, even rivals within the monarchy praised his courage. But within the palace, the fallout was brutal. The king's advisors called it an emotional coup. One senior aide reportedly shouted during a meeting, "He's broken protocol beyond repair." But what they didn't realize was that the protocol had already been broken by love, by truth, by the one thing the royal system could never contain, emotion. That night, Adrian returned home. The corridors were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of lavender, Eleanor's favorite. He walked into her room. She was awake, weak but smiling. A nurse helped her sit up as Adrian knelt beside her bed. "I saw it," she whispered. "You spoke beautifully." He smiled through tears. "You'd have said it better." She reached for his hand, fingers cold but steady. "No," she said. "You said it exactly the way it needed to be said." They sat there for a long while, neither speaking. Just the faint ticking of a clock and the slow rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the nation waited for updates. Inside that quiet room, two people just held on to each other, as if love itself could stop time. But the peace wouldn't last. Because while the people mourned and the family grieved, there were others plotting a very different response. The palace had lost control once, and they vowed it would never happen again. A secret strategy meeting was already underway. And the plan they were about to unleash would not only silence Prince Adrian, but rewrite the story of Princess Eleanor forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.